Hey guys, how's it going? I'm back here with another video, and today I decided to continue the series which I started this week. We're going to be going to episode 2 of this CRUD tutorial where I'm going to teach you guys how to build a CRUD using GraphQL, React, NodeJS, Express, TypeOrm, a bunch of technologies, and yeah, that's basically it. So in the last video, we built a lot of stuff. The video was like 50 minutes long, and we're able to get a bunch of the configuration kind of done and settled, right? And now we start to get actually to the good part, which is where we code most of our stuff. And you can see that what we've done is basically now we're able to make a query which returns all the users. So in our database we only have one user, as you can see, and we can also create a new user if we do a mutation, right? We've tested this before. That's how we have this user over here. We just come over here and say create user, and we just put like a name, a username. Let me just put a new person. I'm gonna add someone called Jack. A username. The person will have a username called Jack123, and let's just put a password here, which is going to be something like subscribe, like this, right? And you can basically create this mutation, and you can then ask for it to return back the name, the username, and the password, so we can just check to see if it's working, right? And when I run this, you'll see the mutation works. And if we do the same query, the get all users query again, you'll see that now it returns all the users, including Jack, which has been inserted into our database. You can see that Jack has an ID of 3 is because before making this video, I tested and added someone into our database, and it worked, so I just erased them later, and you can see we have a new user in our database. So what are we going to do in this video? So basically, I think that we will finalize, like we will end the update and delete part of our CRUD, and we're also going to add some like cool stuff that we can do, maybe some error handling at the end. So you can see that over here, this is our code, right? We have here a bunch of files, a bunch of folders. We structured our project really nicely, and we put all of our mutations in the mutations folder and all of our queries in the queries folder. So what happens is we want to basically, for now, we want to build the update and the delete, right? So that basically goes inside of mutations because we're mutating the table. Queries, as I mentioned in the previous video, only returns, or like it only serves for the read portion of CRUD. But for update, delete, and for create, we use mutations. So currently we only have one mutation, which is the mutation to create a user, which we're going to change right now because we're going to actually add more mutations. The first one, it's going to be actually pretty simple. It's going to be the delete. And I want to create that one because the update will be a little bit more complicated, and in my opinion, it will be a little bit cooler. But the delete will be pretty straightforward. We're just going to say something like delete user over here. Let me set this equal to this. And we're going to copy literally all of this into our delete because it's pretty similar, the format of a mutation and a query. So we can just copy and paste this. Now, for now, let's just leave the type as a user type. With a delete, we usually don't care that much because, like, why would you return anything from a delete statement, right? You just want to delete the user from the database. But right now, we can just leave it like this, and it should be fine. And then let's think about this. What arguments should we receive in order to delete it, right? So we want to delete a certain user from our database. So we might want to hear, like, or receive some type of identifier to each element in our database or in our table we really want to delete. So the identifier that usually people use is the ID, right? So if I want to delete and I'll open this up over here. If I want to delete PedroTech or Jack, I would have to put the ID 1 or the ID 3 in the request so that we can actually delete the correct person. So to make the ID an argument, we can just come over here and say ID is equal to of type GraphQL ID, right? Because that's how we defined ID in our type definitions, if you recall, over here. And let me just delete this. Now what we can do is we already have our arguments, and we can just access this ID by coming over here and just saying something like ID, like this. But it's a bit easier to just do it like this, const ID equal to args.id. Both things does the same, but I just wanted to do it this way because since it's just one element, I don't want to just destructure it. This is fine. So what do we do now? Let me just delete all of this, and let's actually write some the TypeOrm function to delete a user. Well, in TypeOrm, it's actually pretty simple. You can see we have here an asynchronous function. Let's just leave it like this. What we can do is we can write await, and we can say users, which again is our TypeOrm entity for the users table, and we can just press dot delete. And inside of here, since we're trying to delete something based on the ID, it's going to be pretty straightforward. We could just pass the ID over here. TypeOrm recognizes that this is a number, this is an ID, so it automatically identifies this to be the ID. But if we wanted to delete a user for some reason based on the username, we would have to do something like this. Delete username equal to whatever the username we want to, like, of the row that we want to delete, right? But for ID, we don't even need to do this. We could have done like this, ID equal to ID, but again, TypeOrm identifies it directly if you do it this way. So we're just deleting the user based on the ID. And at the end, we can just return something. It doesn't really matter, as I mentioned. We don't even need to return anything, as I mentioned, because in a delete statement, you don't care that much about returning stuff. However, at the end of the video, as I mentioned, we're going to work with some error handling. Consequently, we're going to do some messages as well. So like sending a message back saying if the request was successful or not. So now we can try this. We can try to see if this mutation works. And to recap what we did in the last video, to make this mutation work, we need to grab this mutation called delete user. We have to come here to our schemas index.ts, which is this one over here. And inside of our mutation object type, we have to put a new mutation as a field called delete user, right? We can call it whatever we want, but we're going to create a function called delete user, and it must be equal to the mutation called delete user. It automatically is imported, as you can see over here. But if it doesn't for you, you need to import it from the mutations folder user file that we created over here, right? So now this should be it for executing this mutation. We can save our file. We'll open up here our server. We'll refresh our file or our browser. And then we can just write here mutation. Then write the name of the mutation. And you can see it already auto-completes delete user. And we have to pass an ID. So the ID we want to pass is, let's just delete Jack. I'll delete Jack. So to delete him, I'll just pass 3 because that's the ID. And then we just do it like this, similar to a function. And inside of here, we can put what arguments we want. As you guys remember, we're not actually returning anything, but I'll just pass the ID here or whatever, just so that it doesn't give us an error. So when we click run, you'll see that it will say data delete user null. This means it works. The reason why it says null is again because we didn't tell it to return anything. And if we want to check to see if this works, we can just query again, get all users, and I'll get just like the username and password from each user. And let's see if this works. And as you can see, we only have one user in the database or in the table, which is the PedroTech user, which isn't Jack, right? So we successfully deleted a user from our table. So that's perfect. So we have our delete statement working. Now let's actually get started in the update statement. And what I thought would be that to update in our table, we can actually provide a similar example to what you guys might be used to in real applications, which is basically we'll create a function or a mutation which will be able to update a user's password, right? So let's actually already start doing this. I'll just export a new mutation called update password like this, and we can just do like this, and then we can just copy again most of the stuff that we've done so far. So I'll just copy whatever is inside of here and just paste it over here. And again, for now, let's just leave the type as user type, but we're going to change that later. Now, what will this function do, right? So we have to pass a username, and that username will be the username of the user we want to update the password. And then to verify if the user trying to update this user's password is actually the user. So like if I want to update my password, they have to make sure to see if the person making this request is actually me, right? So what websites usually do is they usually ask you to put the old password that the user had in order to change your password, right? So we're going to do something similar to that. So in order to do that, we have to grab in our arguments 3 different things. We have to grab the username of the user we want to delete or update, sorry. And obviously that would be of type GraphQL string. Then we need to grab the old password. So we're going to ask the person trying to update the password to put in like their old password, the correct password. And it will be again of GraphQL string. And then we'll also ask them to put the new password, which will be the one we're going to update, right? And it will be of type GraphQL string as well. And now that we have this done, we can come here at the bottom and we'll delete both of this because we're not going to do any of them. And then we'll just come over here and first of all, just destructure all of our arguments so that we have access to them. So we're just going to say const equal to args, and then we're going to grab the username, the old password, and the new password, like this. And now that we have access to them, we can do something very simple with TypeOrm, which is basically we can grab the user by its username, right? So we have to do that. We're going to query in our database something similar to like select a user from users, where username is equal to the username that we inputted, and we're going to have access now to the object containing all the user's information, including their current password, which is the one that should equal to old password. So we'll come over here and say const user equals to await, because we need to wait for the user's information to be returned in order to continue our function or our resolve function. And we're just going to say users dot find one. So with TypeOrm, you can use find, which is what we used for our get all users query, and you can use find one. Find one will obviously just return one user, which is what we want. And inside of here, we can pass that we want to find the user with the username equal to username, the username that we inputted over here. So this should return an object containing all the information from a user with this username. And now what we can do is we can grab that user's old password or current password by saying something like user password equal to user question mark dot password. And the reason why we put a question mark is just because we don't know if this is going to be undefined. We actually haven't defined any interfaces or any types for this, so we're just trying to get a key from an object that TypeScript doesn't know if it has the actual password property. So this will just resolve some issues. If we don't have this, you'll see it will give us errors. So basically, now that we have this done, we have access to the old password. What should we do? Well, we can very easily now just check, okay, we only want the user to update its password if the old password that they inputted is equal to the user password, the actual password in our database. Else, we can actually start by doing some error handling. If it isn't, then we want to maybe throw an error, right? And you can do this very easily with GraphQL, or like you can implement this in using TypeScript, and GraphQL will understand it. By throwing an error, it will arrive in, like the message you put inside of here will be returned in the GraphQL statement. So we can just throw something like passwords do not match, something like this, right? And in our if statement over here, we actually have to write some logic to actually update the user. So there's many ways of updating using TypeOrm, and I've actually debated on how I would approach this. However, I think that the easiest one, especially for beginners, since we won't have to make any queries or anything complicated, like any extra queries or anything complicated, it will be easier to just do something like this. We'll just await the users dot update. So TypeOrm has a function called update, and inside of here we can pass two objects. The first object is an object containing, or it doesn't actually need to be an object, it's just two identifiers, right? So the first one is the identifier to which row or which user we're talking about, right? So the user we want to update is the one which has the username equals to username over here, which is the one we got over here, right? And then this is what we want to update from that user. So we want to update their password and make it equal to the new password that we pass in our mutation. And now what this will do is basically it will just, first of all, check to see, get the user with a username equal to the username we pass in the request, and update its password to the new password. And if we want to return something, we can just return this. It doesn't really matter. We put the return type as user type, but we're going to handle that later. And this should be it for this update mutation. Let's now put this inside of our mutations fields by importing it here at the top. So update password, and just add a function here called update password equal to update password. And now this should be working. Let's come here to our browser And let's refresh our page. Let's just run this again. You can see that I'll just grab like every piece of information from the user. So ID and name. So you can see that the only user we have is Pedro with the username PedroTech and the password equal to password. Let's change this to have a password. I don't know. Let me think. Let's just call this password please subscribe, whatever. Just a random word, right? That isn't the current word. So let's try that. Let's come over here. I'll just comment this out because we don't want it. We will need to use that later. But for now, let's just create a mutation over here, and we're going to use the mutation update password, and it automatically says what kind of arguments we need in this mutation. So we need a username, we need a old password, and we need a new password, like this. So let's put this fields in like this arguments, right? So the username we want to update is the username PedroTech. So let's just pass PedroTech over here. The old password we want to update, like the old password should be password, right? And we need to see, well, we'll check later to see what happens if we don't put the correct password. But for now, let's actually try to change this. And then the new password I want is please subscribe, like this. Now, what we want to return, again, we just need to put something, so I'll put ID, whatever, just some fields, and let's run this query. When we run the query, you'll see that it returns as we did before. It gives it null. However, let's comment this mutation out over here, and let's just uncomment the query so we can see what happens when we query all users again. And as you can see, the password for the user PedroTech changed to please subscribe, which means it is perfectly working. Now let's try to update back to password, but pass the wrong password, right? So that like now it is please subscribe, but let's pass something like, I don't know, hey, whatever, just a random password. And let's see what happens. And I'll change this to new password, whatever, just a random string. When we run this, it should return passwords do not match, because this is actually the error that we sent, right? When we throw new errors, GraphQL already recognizes this as like an actual error in our code, and it will return this message so that we can see it, right? And it doesn't really update, so if we actually try to query again, you'll see that nothing will be changed. We'll have the same password as please subscribe, and it won't be the other password that we try to input, right? So this is basically it for our update statement. Now let's try to do some kind of error handling, which we already did a bit by throwing an error here when the passwords do not match, and maybe do some like interfaces with TypeScript so that we don't use the args as any all the time. So what should we do if we want to create some messages, right? Because remember, in our create user or our update user or delete user requests, we're basically not returning anything useful, right? In the create user, we're only returning our user that we just created back, and our update, we're just returning like a random message, and in our delete user, again, we're not even returning anything. So maybe we want to return like a message, a request, like something saying like delete successful, something like that, right? So how exactly do we do that? Well, there's many ways of doing it. However, one way that I like to do it is I just like to create a different type, something like messages or responses, something like that, .ts. And over here, we'll just copy everything that we did for our user type, and we'll just paste it inside of here. And then we can just change this to something like message type. And again, you can do one of this for errors, you can do one of this for whatever you want. And we'll just change this to message. And over here, we can put whatever fields we want in our message. We can put something like successful, and it can be of type GraphQL Boolean, something like this. It's just a Boolean asking if it was successful or not. And then we can put like a message, which obviously will be of type GraphQL string. GraphQL string over here. And this is kind of like what we want for our type. I'll just delete this ID, which we're not using. And then you might think, okay, we made this type, but what do we do with it? Well, now what we can do is we can actually come over here and import this type from into our mutations folder, or mutations file, right? And this will be from messages, and this will be message type, something like this. Yeah, message type. And now we like every single request, which we don't care that much about what we're returning. We just want to return a message. We can change it to return a type, like something of type message type. And we'll do this for the delete as well. And you can see that now, if I come here at the bottom, and this was successful, like this was actually successful, we can just return a message, something like, I don't know, an object saying successful equals to true. Again, we're not checking to see if it was successful or not, but we're just putting this over here so you guys can understand better how can we return this kind of stuff. And then message will be something like delete worked, something like that. And we'll do the same thing for the update. However, for the update, let's try putting some other messages. Let me think. Yeah, there can be a case where the user name that you put doesn't exist, and in that case, we would have to create a type for errors, which I don't really want to do right now. But actually, we can just come over here and say something like if not user. So what TypeOrm does is basically we'll grab the user, but if it doesn't exist, then this would be satisfied. We don't have a user. Then we could just throw new error, something like username doesn't exist. And then if all of this is successful, we don't even need to return this. We can just return something like password, something like successful equal to true, and message will be equal to password updated. And you can see that I am actually like, what happens is you just need to return in your resolver an object of the type that you defined over here. So we know that in our type, our message type, we need to pass a successful, Boolean, and a message. So this is what we're doing right here. So let's save this and see if it's working. You can see everything is logging perfectly. Let's come to our GraphQL. And what do we want to do? Let's just query everything again to see if it's working. Yeah. And now let's actually just refresh this and let's try to make the mutation work. Let's uncomment this and let's comment our query. And for now, let's try to update, right? Let's try to update. And you can see that it doesn't allow us to actually grab an ID or a name anymore because we're not returning a user type. Now what we can grab from this request is the Boolean successful and the message, right? So both of these things. And now let's actually try to update again. So it is PedroTech. The old password would be please subscribe, right? And let's try to update this to new password as we did try to before, but now with the correct old password. You'll see that now when we run this, it will say successful equal to true and message equal to password updated. And if we uncomment this and uncomment query again, you'll see that everything works perfect. We now have a password of new password. Let's test to see if the other error works, the one where the username doesn't exist. Let's come over here and try to update something with a random username. And you'll see that it will throw the error, username doesn't exist because this user doesn't exist in our table. So you can see everything is working perfectly. And this is basically the end for the backend of the CRUD. In the next video, probably I'll try to create the whole front end, and I'll probably want to end the series with just 3 videos. We're going to work with Apollo client using React so that we can actually make everything work perfectly. And yeah, that's basically it for this video. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like down below and comment what you want to see next. I'm really enjoying making these videos. I usually make more beginner videos. However, I really wanted to make some more semi-intermediate to advanced videos using technologies that I'm using currently. So I really appreciate the support from you guys from liking the previous video. So that's basically it. Really hope you guys enjoyed it, and I see you guys next time.